Erik joins us now to talk about his experience surviving COVID and how it affected him both spiritually and physically. We also welcome Dr. Eustace Fernandes. He's a pulmonologist and critical care specialist in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Thank you both for joining us. Dr. Fernandes, let's start with you. You've been treating COVID patients this entire past year. What have those on the front lines learned about treating severely ill people? Have you modified or adjusted your procedures?
We have. It's incredible the amount we've learned in the last year. I'll give you a quick example. Early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about ventilators and the need to put everyone on ventilators early on. We've since learned in the medical community that this may not be in every patient's best interest. Now we're focused on efforts to use non-invasive means to keep patients off ventilators. Early on, we talked a lot about a drug called hydroxychloroquine. Now we use a drug called tocilizumab, which there's good data that suggests improves outcomes for patients. So we've had tremendous leaps in the last year, a great deal that is largely unknown, but we continue to learn every day about this terrible disease.
It's fantastic to have these medical advances. Erik, you were sick for weeks.
Oh, I certainly was.
Yeah, checking yourself into the hospital. When did you realize that you were in deep trouble? And thank God you were never on a ventilator, right?
No, I never was on a ventilator, but I tell you what, my oxygen level dropped down to about 84%, wow. Which is very, as you heard from the doctor, wow, yeah, that was very, very low. As soon as I went into the hospital, I had actually passed out on the bathroom floor. Oh. And I got up from there. My wife, she heard a thump, and I went in. She went in there, and she says, "What's going on?" And so we ended up just driving to the hospital. And of course, because of COVID, she couldn't go inside, so she just had to drop me off there, and literally went inside. And that's when they did the oximeter on me and checked out. And yeah, it was 84%, my oxygen level. They immediately put me on oxygen. Thankfully, I didn't have to go on a ventilator, but there were many, many people there in the hospital that had to go on a ventilator, and that was just very, very sad to see.
Yeah, you've told your work colleagues here at EWTN that one of the most alarming things that happened to you in the hospital was that deep sense of isolation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's, when you go inside the hospital, of course, your wife couldn't go inside. My wife couldn't go inside to drop me off. And as soon as you get inside of a room, you were literally alone. And a big giant sign that says COVID patient inside, you can't go in. Every time the doctors and nurses, they want to be able to protect themselves. So they came in fully garbed up with not only their masks, but also little vacuums and everything hooked up to their bodies to prevent the virus from actually getting into their respiratory area. And they came in, checked your vitals, and then they took off. And I ended up calling Father Patrick here at EWTN many a time to pray with him. I called my church father as well over at St. Mary's to talk with him for a while. And it's the isolation. That is what's the biggest thing, that, just being there by yourself and having time to think. And after 5 days of being hospitalized, I was ready to come home. So.
Yeah. Dr. Fernandes, you're hearing Erik's story, which I'm sure isn't new to you. I'm sure you've seen many patients many times experience that same isolation. As medical staff, what do you do to help patients with that?
Sure. There are a lot of things that we can do. Technology is a mixed blessing, but in the case of COVID-19 patients, we've been able to use things like iPads and iPhones or tablets to allow people to actually see one another when they're in that bitter isolation. So just seeing a familiar face or hearing a familiar voice, particularly in the intensive care unit where I do most of my work, is extraordinarily important and facilitated by technology. It doesn't make up for human touch, though, and the opportunity of doctors and nurses to go in and actually touch patients and pray with them and things like that has been extraordinary for me as a Catholic physician during the pandemic.
Yeah, I do have to say, doctor, that there was one particular nurse. Her name was Nancy, and she actually did come in, and we prayed together. She was a believer, and That really makes the difference there. I wanted to ask you, though, something. After I got out of the hospital and after I recovered, and in order to be able to get the vaccine, I did have to wait a little bit. Why is that? I thought I had the antibodies, but you have to actually wait a couple of months before you get the vaccine after you had COVID, correct?
Right. So there are a couple concerns. The first concern is a vaccine supply issue. So we know with good, reliable data that you have 90 days of protection after you've had COVID because your own immune system has generated antibodies already. So if you wait 90 days, you might make that vaccine dose available for someone who is vulnerable but has not yet had COVID.
Okay.
Secondly, there is concern that your immune system still reacting to COVID might spike up again and have a hyperactive response to the presence of the vaccine. And then the last concern is that the antibodies generated by the vaccine may in some way compete with the antibodies that your immune system is actually generating. So you want the most robust antibody response that you can.
That's great. Erik, when you were hospitalized, you and another patient prayed together. You were talking about this nurse, Nancy, but you actually prayed together at a distance with somebody.
Yes,
Can you
I
tell
did.
us about that?
I tell you what, this was a woman, I didn't even catch her name, but this was a woman in her 80s. She literally had stage 2 or stage 4 cancer because of HIPAA laws. I was not able to find out, but one of the nurses did tell me that she probably is never going to go home. And I literally heard her in the I'm sorry if I'm getting a little choked up here, but I heard her crying and praying in the room next to me. And I knew that she was a believer. And we started by just kind of tapping on the wall, and then it turned into actual prayer between the two of us. And I got to tell you, that was the hardest thing to do, was when, after the 5 days, when they brought my oxygen level, I was at 20% to 15% to 10, and then eventually went down to 0. And when I was at 0 and they released me, that was the part. I didn't want to go home because I didn't want to leave her there. But you know, I got to tell you that God had me there for a reason, and it was to be able to pray with this woman. And you know, we were there together, and it was at times you could literally feel the Holy Spirit between the wall.
And that's what the church teaches, that there's that grace in suffering and purpose to suffering. How are you now? How are you doing? Are you completely recovered?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I do, because I had COVID pneumonia. My lung capacity is still not 100% yet. Doctors say that it's going to take about a year to be able to get 100% to lung capacity. But you know, I'm running around the Capitol trying to chase after those lawmakers and get them on the record. And at times I have to tell the photographer, hey, let's just kind of stop a little bit and catch our breath. But no, I'm on the road to recovery. But I tell you what, it's the millions out there that still are battling this thing. And the isolation, that's what I want to get to, is the isolation. If we can just continue to keep them in our prayers, and just continue. I mean, good doctors like the doctor there, is just be there for them, you know, and be able to listen to them.
We absolutely want to do that.
I think it's really important to emphasize that we have an opportunity, despite all the tragedy of the pandemic, to exhibit real solidarity as doctors, nurses, therapists work with these patients to all kind of suffer together and to battle back this isolation that you're talking about. Patients who have suffered through this can share their experiences and show solidarity with others, and it's really a act of charity and love towards a neighbor.
It certainly is. You know, I got to tell you, Doctor, this has just been an amazing experience to have the nurse there pray with me, and then that just makes the hours and the days go by just so much faster. Dr.
Fernandes, I have one last burning question for you. You've given us this great advice. The government experts and the CDC say vaccines, continued masking, and keeping a distance and getting back is what's going to get us back to normal. Is this your advice as well, just really quickly, so that we know what we should be doing?
I believe that you have to strike a balance between protecting the vulnerable and continuing to live as human beings, because we're meant to live together and flourish. We have to take care of our most vulnerable citizens. Of course, I believe vaccination and preparing the immune system to fight this battle is our most important weapon, and being sensible about staying home when you're sick, washing your hands, etc. So those are the key points that will get us out of this pandemic and allow us to flourish together as a community and as a church.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Eric, for your personal story.
Thank you.
We'll be praying to make sure you can keep running after those people on the Hill.
Thank you so much.